Okay, thank you, Diane. Diane's been doing an awful lot of behind-the-scenes things, so let's give Diane a big hand because she really is really good at it. Our speaker today is Elisabeth Cornwell. You can hardly mention Richard Dawkins without thinking of Elisabeth Cornwell because they're really connected very closely. She's the organizational arm of the Richard Dawkins Foundation, and she's really a giant in the Freethought community, and everybody recognizes everything that she's been doing to really promote free thought. She promotes outreach by atheists, and I think that's something that we as a group here have been trying to promote more and more of. Patty is trying to get something organized in that regard to where we get more visibility in the community by doing things at food banks and things of that nature. So we need to show people that we don't just eat little babies and do nasty things to people. So I think it's a big thing that she's trying to do and that we would like to do more of. She's also on this youth thing as well, trying to make young people, children as a matter of fact, able to go with their parents to conferences, so the parents can go to the conferences and have the children provided for in some other venue. So I think that's a really worthwhile thing that she's doing, and I really appreciate those efforts. She also arranges all of Richard Dawkins' speaking engagements, and we have been talking to her about this over the years, but our big sister in Phoenix tends to get all the play. So we'd like to have you think about it sometime because we're here and we're a pretty viable group as well. So we'd love to have Richard down here. Okay. She does like things like gardens, history, and cats. I've looked up some of the stuff on the website, and so she's very happy, and I noticed when we had the animals up here, she was very happy to see the little kittens and the mother with it, so that was good. She dislikes the British Broadcasting Company, I found out, and Saturday night TV, as well as faith healing. So those are some of the things that personalize her a little bit, and I think we're all in that same mode. So she's going to talk today about Where's Eve? And I think she's noticed that there are not enough women in the secular world contributing, it seems to be, in her eyes, and perhaps so, mostly a men's thing. And are the women dominated more by religion? It seems, I think that may be the case. And why would religion be more important to women than they would be to men? These are some of the questions that she's posing. And are men hostile towards the women that are in this group? So maybe she can give us some of those answers. So let's give it up for Elisabeth Cornwell. Thank you.
Good morning and happy Mother's Day. I'm going to set up my computer here, so give me a moment. But the free thinking, the critical thinking in Kenya is a wonderful project, and I hope we can talk later and see what the Richard Dawkins Foundation can do through their non-believers giving aid to perhaps raise some more money for that very worthy cause. I'd like to see that. And then after you help Kenya, I was wondering if you could send a few people to Sedona. My friend Chris and I went to Sedona. I made this a little bit of a play date as well, and Sedona is always pretty fascinating. It's so beautiful there, right? I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. We did some hiking and went up Bear Mountain, and we were on one short little hike where the trolley, the vortex trolley, dropped off some people, and as we were walking down, these women asked me, of all people, is this where the vortex is? And fortunately, I think I had my sunglasses on, so she didn't see me roll my eyes, but I said, I'm probably not the right person to ask. And then, of course, there's a lot of woo there. It's pretty interesting. So today I'm going to talk about, as Jerry mentioned, where's Eve? Now, things have changed a little bit since I first started becoming involved with the Freethought movement. There are certainly many more women than I originally saw, but it still tends to be more men. And I'm going to talk not so much about the secular movement as I am going to talk about women and religion, because it's an interesting question, and as to why women in every poll tend to be more religious, more involved than men. So, in general, when we look at it as Freethought people, we talk about, we wonder why women are drawn to religion when it seems that religion traditionally has devalued women, treats them as chattel and as second-class citizens. And it often points out that women have suffered terribly under the regime of religious dogma. And traditionally, males have controlled religion, and only recently, and only in the more liberal churches, are women joining the clergy. And of course, through the clergy project, they're then leaving. In some religions, such as Judaism, Catholicism, and Islam, women are banned from leading positions. In Buddhism, for example, the highest-ranking nun is outranked by the lowest-ranking monk. Yet despite the bigotry and injustice and violence against women through religious beliefs, women are far more likely to be religious, be active within religious institutions, and pass religion on to the next generation, the hand that rocks the cradle, thereby sealing the fates of their own daughters, often with terrible consequences. So, in terms of women and religion, a Pew study in 2007 showed that women are affiliated, about 86% of women are affiliated with religion compared to 79% of men. In terms of absolute certain belief in God or a universal spirit, it's 77% men and 65% women. And then, I'm sorry, what did I say, 77%? 77% women and 65% men, sorry. And in terms of prayer daily, it's 66% women and 49% men. So there's a big discrepancy here. This is statistical differences between the two sexes. And by the way, I use the term sex and not gender. I just want to clarify this. I mean, my background's in biology. Sex are chromosomes. Gender is what we feel like today. So I tend to never use the term gender. I know it's politically correct, but it's actually kind of meaningless. And then in terms of absolute certainty in a personal God, it's 58% women and 45% men. So the question we always ask ourselves is why? I mean, a lot of us, especially those of us who are women, sort of look at other women thinking, do you not see how awful this is to you? Why do you believe this stuff? And so there's been a lot of discussion within the movement why women are less likely to be involved with our secular movement. And some have proposed that women feel unwelcome or that they're underrepresented as spokespersons or in leadership positions, or that the movement, being heavily male-biased, neglects the needs of women. And overall, the secular movement is left-leaning, and in general, liberals are far more egalitarian than social conservatives, which adds to the puzzle given that members of the secular atheist movement are far less likely to hold women in contempt than in religious social context. So the way I look at it from an evolutionary perspective, because that's my background, is in evolutionary biology, and I'm a psychologist, not the kind of psychologist that you want to tell your mother about, but the kind of psychologist who does research, which is actually most of what psychology does. So the question, though, from a biological perspective is are we asking the right questions? What can we learn from religion? So are we missing something fundamental when we look at why women tend to be more religious? And I would conjecture that despite the irony of religion, that we see that religion is certainly biased against women and certainly oppressed women over the centuries, there's got to be something that benefits women. One of the key things about biology when you're looking at any living thing is if there is a behavior or a trait or something that is costly, there has to be a benefit that overrides that cost. And so I want to look at religion in that way. We tend to neglect, and I know a lot of people do talk about it, but neglect the benefits that religion might offer that offset the oppression that women face. So I would like to suggest that we are ignoring one of our heroes, and that hero is Charles Darwin. Whoops, I went too far. So rather than looking at the veneer, I want to look at the deeper issues. There is a bit of a paradox here that the two groups who attack evolutionary theory are the religious right and the far left. The fundamentalists don't like evolutionary theory because it goes against biblical teachings, and the far left have attacked the use of evolutionary theory to explain human behavior because it does not sit right with the long-held beliefs about how environment and not genetic differences can explain human behavior or sex differences. So we evolutionary psychologists are held in contempt by both sides of the political spectrum, and therefore I can say anything I want. One of the mantras of evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology when applied to human behavior is that an is does not imply an ought. Oops. That's not good. Is there somebody who can fix the screen? I'll keep talking while the screen gets fixed. I don't know what happened. Anyway, so what I mean by an is does not need to be an ought is that even though we can describe that certain behaviors are due to our ancestral legacy, that doesn't mean that we have to live by that. We do have these big brains that we can exert control over some of our more basic natures. Humans are and can be violent, and we can be aggressive, but we can make a decision not to be. So that's what it's meant by an is not an ought. So if we go back to basics and understand and accept the crucial and fundamental differences between the sexes, but remembering that these differences do not imply judgment, that one sex is besting another, and that sexism is not inherent in any aspect of evolutionary psychology. We just want to look at the differences and understand them, because if we can't understand them from their basics, then we're not getting to the point. We can't correct them. So the other theory that we need to look at is Robert Trivers' parental investment theory, which is Robert Trivers, if you don't know much about, if you haven't read up on a lot of evolutionary biology, Robert Trivers is considered one of the most important theorists, along with Bill Hamilton and John Maynard Smith and others, in terms of evolutionary theory. And he came up with, one of his theories is parental investment theory, which basically says, well, I'll get into it. So natural selection, so let's start with Darwin's natural selection. As you guys know, I'm just going to do a little refresher course. It's very, very basic natural selection, and that is it proposes individual differences which arise through genes and those mutations of genes. And a very small number of mutations of genes are beneficial. Most are either benign or damaging. But these differences in the genes are heritable. That's the second part of Darwin's theory. I mean, although he did not know about genes, he talked about heritability and traits. And that some of these genes, or as Darwin called traits, confer reproductive advantages.
The lamp has gone out.
Okay.
We have no way to fix it.
Okay, we're going to go without slides. I'll mime them. So, okay. So that's just the basic, right? There's traits that confer there's traits that exist within the individual species, the individual. There's heritability, and there's reproductive success. Now, Darwin used the theory of sexual selection, which is basically a part of his theory of natural selection, to explain traits in certain species that seem to actually be a hindrance. And the beautiful picture I was going to show you was the peacock's tail. Now, if you look at a peahen, she's rather drab, which is good because she can hide her eggs and hide in the bush and survive and raise her offspring. The peacock, of course, has that amazing train, which, if you consider trying to run away from a predator, is not particularly useful. However, and Darwin actually said the sight of a peacock, the feather of a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze upon it, makes me sick. And that's because he couldn't explain it through his theory of natural selection. So he spent a lot of time, Darwin is absolutely brilliant, spent a lot of time thinking about sexual selection. And what he figured out was that females showed a preference for certain traits in males. Now, in the peacock, since long after Darwin wrote about it, there were studies done on peacock tails, and what the studies did was simply take a couple of peacocks, and one, they enhanced the tail, and the other, poor guy, the other peacock, they sort of damaged his tail. It didn't hurt the peacock, maybe his pride, but it didn't hurt him. And then, so they were in two different cages, and then inside a middle cage was a female, a peahen, who, because of her size being smaller, could get in and out, and she could choose whichever peacock she wanted to mate with. And overwhelmingly, the peahens would go to the one with the beautiful tail and ignore the poor guy that didn't have a very nice tail. And so this theory of sexual selection is critically important, and I'm not going to go into much more detail about that, but it's fascinating, and it's what I did a lot of my work in is on sexual selection in humans. And I can't show this cartoon, but I'll describe it to you. It's from the New Yorker, and it shows a couple standing in front of a theater, and you guys all kind of know how the New Yorker cartoons look. And the woman says to the man, "Yes, I realize that we are free agents, but I have to take on the additional risk of pregnancy and am more susceptible to certain sexually transmitted diseases, so I think you should pay for the movie." Well, this is the basics of Robert Trivers' parental investment theory, which is key to sexual selection theory. His theory stipulates that the sex who bears the greatest cost of offspring will be the choosiest. Now, oysters, if we take oysters, for example, they don't differ in cost. Both sexes just spew out eggs and sperm, and off they go to someone's dinner plate. Humans, on the other hand, invest by far the most in offspring of any other species. And in light of Mother's Day, we can reflect on that sort of investment we humans, both men and women, are willing to make. If you think about it, the fact that humans delay reproduction by usually 20 years or longer shows just how costly human reproduction is. Even in very large animals like elephants, whales, we don't see that type of delay. And if you think about it, that's costly. You have 20 years or so of something happening to that offspring. I mean, it's a terrible thing to think about, but, Mother Nature doesn't really care. But, that's a great cost. The parent has expended all this cost, and offspring that you don't know is going to reproduce. And that's, of course, that's it, right? That's what we're here for, if we're going to say we're here for anything. So the fact that we delay reproduction and children are fairly useless when it comes to our reproductive success when they're young. They're good for other things. I like children, and some more than others. And both parents do care for children in humans. So while the individual who bears the greatest reproductive cost will be the choosiest, the least investing must display superior qualities in order to be chosen. And I'm talking across the animal kingdom. Obviously, plants don't do a lot of choosing. So, for example, we find strength, flash, dash, and weapons. That's what we call it. And that's what we usually talk about in evolutionary psychology. And the picture I had was, I have a home in Colorado, and it's the beautiful Rocky Mountain sheep. And of course, the males have harems or harems, and they're, they have these they've evolved these amazing skulls to have that impact when they're fighting over the harems. Have any of you ever seen or heard these animals do this? I mean, it's an amazing sound. It's loud. And I mean, we would be dead, basically, if we even tried anything like that. But the winner gets this huge number of females in order to reproduce. So very few male rams reproduce, but those who do it really well. And that's part of sexual selection. So while in humans we do co-parent, and men do heavily invest, and I just don't want you walking away thinking that I'm saying that men don't invest in their offspring. They do. And the reason they do is because our female ancestors chose men who are more likely to invest in offspring, and those genes were passed down. As I always would tell my students and my other audiences, if you're going to blame anyone for the problems we have with the opposite sex, blame your same-sex ancestors, because it's because of them that both males and females have particular traits. But despite the fact that most men will invest in offspring, they don't have to. And they can actually walk away. And women can't if they're impregnated. Now, we're talking about our ancestral past, so we're not going to include modern conveniences such as reliable birth control and safe abortions. We have to think about how the behaviors were formed in the past and not consider our modernity. So to understand the basis for human sexual preferences, we need to go back to the earliest human ancestors. For example, in pre-literate societies, with each successful birth, there was probably 2 to 4 years lactation, which acts as a natural birth control. We find in hunter-gatherer women, because when anthropologists first started studying hunter-gatherer tribes, they were still living the way they had for thousands of years. And on average, there would be 4 pregnancies with about 2 children surviving into adulthood and reproducing on their own. So there was a huge cost to women in terms of bearing children that men never have to face. And one of those is death during childbirth. And women overall will choose, if they have free choice, will tend to choose to have fewer children. Men, and we see this in religiously controlled homes where the man is the head of the household and makes the decisions, this is where we see people having lots of children. Men don't bear the physical cost of bearing children. And the physical cost on women is quite high. Not only is the chance of dying in childbirth high, but also women's lives are shortened by having a lot of children, especially male children. Those women who have more male children tend to die younger than those who have female children, and those who have no children live longest at all. Of course, some of that may just be insanity from having children, but we won't talk about that. That's a different hypothesis and a different talk. So male investment, human male investment, can be minimal. I had this great slide. And do you remember this with Woody Allen when he was the sperm? Do you remember that? I figured this crowd would remember that. So, the joke is that sperm is cheap, right? And we've all heard, people say, oh, one man could populate the entire, impregnate all the women in the world because they can continually generate sperm. And so, that is still within our species as humans. And we do see this. We see more single mothers than we do single fathers, right? And we do see women who become pregnant and raise children on their own, and the male just leaves. Or we see divorces where the men fight not trying to pay their child support and things. So we do see this still in our modern society. But even though women have been, through our ancestral past, women have been selecting for good fathers, there is still some other conundrums for women in modern society. Men are still larger, stronger, more violent, and have stronger preferences for multiple partners than women do. In fact, one of the ways that in biology we look at whether or not a particular species is monogamous or not monogamous is by looking at the differences between the male and female. When the male is brightly colored, that tends, and the female is drab, that tends to suggest that the male has multiple mates and that the female is choosing. The hummingbird is one of those. The female raises the offspring on her own. With size is another one. Males that, like the gorilla, males that are very large and the females are much smaller. Again, we find a harem. Humans and chimpanzees, males are bigger, females are smaller, but it's not harem, it's promiscuity. And so the bigger chimps dominate over the males and will tend to, and are chosen more by females for mating. Humans, we still see overall a size difference between males and females, which suggests that we tend to be polygynous. And of course, polygyny has been a part of most societies throughout human history. Excuse me. Take some water here. So, women have had to, because they don't have the strength of men, they don't have the power of men, again, an ancestral past. Women have had to navigate through the dangerous shoals of male human nature by developing higher social intelligence and capacities to play the nurturing role. Now, this benefits children as well as men. The strategy that women have developed relies on female bonding, development of safe havens for children, and psychological support for others in need. This is what women have done to survive. I have to go through all my slides before I get to the next one. So, how have women managed to adapt to this environment, this social environment where they don't have the strength? And what I'm really going to be talking about is when humans went into agriculture, because hunter-gatherer societies tend to be much more egalitarian, much more like Western culture as we know it. And divorce rates are about the same and come about the same time. But they don't have possessions. Whereas once agriculture came into being, humans could control land. And if you control land, you have to do that through strength. And women didn't have that capacity. So how they navigated is by building superior communication skills, verbal fluency, greater ability to read facial emotions and body posturing, greater ability to remember wrongs, keep score. We do. All the data shows that women are really tend to keep score. We're the ones that, and most of you are older and probably have been married for a while, and when something goes wrong and somebody that, then it's the woman who will bring up, well, this reminds me of the time that you left me at the bus station 25 years ago and it was raining and I ended up with a cold and how could you have forgotten me, right? I mean, we're guilty of that, aren't we? We have to kind of admit. But there's a reason we keep score. There's a very good reason to keep score because we have to rely on commitment cues to make sure that our mate stays with us. So we're always looking for those little cues that he might not stay because we, and through our historic past, have had to rely on males because when you have children, it's very difficult to, you can't go hunting, you can't, I mean, you need to have those male resources that were supplied. So those, that keeping scores is for a reason. But we should also keep in mind that when we're doing it and maybe not do it quite as much. So let's go back to this, let's compare with the Stone Age and the modern world. Women's ancestral legacy versus the current Western cultural environment. Again, despite the changes in our culture, the liberation of women from chattel of religion, our archaic brains still keep women tied to their ancestral past. There's still a high cost of offspring, but in the current environment, we have economic independence, education, political power, and are no longer family dependent. And we still, for at least the meantime, have reproductive control over our own bodies. Hopefully, we won't lose that soon. So the sorts of benefits that religion offers. Again, remember cost and benefit. We know that religion's costly to women. But the cost is offset by the fact that religion also keeps control of men. It enforces things like taking care of your family. It enforces things by telling the male not to, to keep that he has a certain loyalty to his wife. He may have more than one wife, but he has to take care of that. And religion offers that. Also, religion offers fictive kin. It offers support groups to women. They have an immediate family. And if they lose a mate, religion, and that would have happened in our ancestral past as well, they have a group that can help support them. And that's why religions often use terms like brother and sister. We have all this fictive kin. And the other thing through all this is religion offers social benefits. And if you think about one of the most successful non-governmental social welfare programs in the US, it's the Mormon Church. They offer all kinds of social benefits. And for women, that may be essential, especially if, for some reason, they lose the male investment, either through death, or the male's left, or the male's lost his job. But having that social support is extremely important, because if you lose that, your children suffer. And women, remember, costs more for women to reproduce than it does for men. So when we think about why politically religious fundamentalists in the US want to dismantle government social welfare programs, including public education, family planning, childcare, and healthcare, it's because it directly competes with religion. They want religion to be the social welfare programs, and we know, we've heard politicians talk about this. Let's let religion do this. So I'm going to take a little detour for a moment, mostly because I had been in Sedona, and so I was thinking about this. One of the things that religion also offers is the idea of being able to hand your problems up to God, right? You can't do it by yourself. You have to hand your problems up to God, and you'll be okay. And God will take care of you. And even though this isn't an issue for strictly women to face, men do it as well, but historically women have had less power than men, and they need to give up their problems, maybe more so than men, because they're responsible for keeping the family together. Like it or not, it's not PC, but it's generally women who keep the family together in terms of its emotional stability. And especially now with modern world, women are under a lot of pressure. Now, religion is pretty much a billion-dollar industry, but the other thing that spawned from this is the self-help phenomenon. And this kind of reinforces what I'm trying to say about how women and men differ. Women and why women tend to be more religious. I mean, people like Oprah Winfrey and Geraldo and Dr. Phil all offer these ways of, you have to give yourself up, you have to assume that you can't take care of your own problems, and you have to rely on a 12-step or 6-step or 5-step or whatever type of thing. And then there's all the self-help books that kind of say the same thing, that you're really powerless unless you give up to some sort of higher power. And who buys the majority of these books? It's women. At least 70% of the books, these self-help type books, are purchased by women. And there is a very, very strong religious undertone to all of these books. They may say higher power. The ones that are specifically Christian, of course, will say God. So I'm going to come back to the question, is the secular movement failing women and children? And I think that there's some truth that maybe we are. Wherever we find secular social support coupled with democracy, we find that the need for religion wanes. The question in terms of the US, I mean, we stand out as an anomaly, right? Compared to all the other Western nations in terms of education and all this, you would expect religion to drop. But we are a nation of volunteers. We have always relied on volunteers to help. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it has this effect that because we rely so much on volunteers and not on the government, then this reliancy on help from non-secular groups, we rely on them heavily. And it's a conundrum, because I'm not even suggesting that, I'm not going to get into the political stuff on it, but to give you an example, in Estonia, 16% of people are religious, Sweden, 17%, Denmark, 19%, and the United Kingdom, 27%. These are all highly socialist countries. And then we see countries like Bangladesh, which is 99% religious, Nigeria is 99%, Yemen, 99%, and the United States, 65%. So it's just a big difference. And that's why these faith-based initiatives are really kind of scary, because it reinforces the fact that you have to go back to religion in order to get support. And I live just outside of DC, so I'm in DC quite a bit. And recently I was driving by one of the poorer parts of town, heavily black, and there was a big church sign out with free daycare. Now, if you're a single mom, and among the black community, single moms is more the majority than not. And if you're struggling in trying to keep your kids fed and try to keep a roof over your head, and you have a choice between free daycare and paying Montessori prices, what are you going to do? You're a mom, you're going to go to the free daycare. And if that means that you have to buy into the religion, you're going to do it, because we are geared to help our children survive. That basic need, that underlying current that has been built into our ancestors, not just humans, but all the way back to when we were little tiny shrews, taking care of offspring. That's what mammals do. We take care of offspring, and we are mammals. And that drives us to doing everything we can to help our children survive. And if that means giving up our own freedom, that's what we'll do. If it means being beaten by a spouse, we'll put up with that. That's what women do. So, as a secular movement, what do we do? What can we do to fulfill that need of women so they don't have to rely on religion? I mean, we need to talk about this. We need to have some real open discussions about how we bring money in, how do we create daycare. Now, I know that with religious schools, they immediately get all the tax benefits. That's a problem. I mean, it wouldn't be a problem if organizations like ours could do the same thing, that it would be easy to set up a secular daycare where we didn't have to pay property taxes and all the other taxes that we have to pay when we make a profit. So secular daycares are more expensive. And plus, in many states, religious daycare don't have to obey all the rules. They don't have to have the kinds of checks and balances that secular daycares need, like doing background checks and having the correct ratio of adults to children and all the regulations that need to go in and how you keep care of the children and having inspectors come in. So that's one. And also the social support. What happens when a woman loses her husband or boyfriend who's been helping with the family support? Where are we? Are we helping them? Are we giving them a place of refuge? What happens when they're beaten? What happens where do they go? Do we offer anything like that? We really don't. So we are failing women. If we want women to not continue the cycle of handing the oppression of religion to their children, we have to do something. We have to give them an option of someplace else to go. We have to offer them and understand that women are different than men. There are these vital differences. And if we ignore that, we ignore the problem. It is not because there are more men who have been involved in the secular movement. It is not because women are made to feel unwelcome. Those aren't the primary reasons. The primary reason is that women turn to religion because they want their children to live. And that really is what it comes down to. We need to create the social networks. We need political activism. I'm so glad the senator's here because she understands. Political activism, and I know all of you understand. But we have to be active on the issues for women and children. And that's how we bring women into the secular movement. We offer those things. And thank you for listening.
We have time for questions, so we'll participate by going down the aisles here on either aisle. Don, we have that one, and I'll move over on this side. Okay. Who wants to be first?
But Elisabeth, isn't the opportunity to provide the secular benefits, isn't that the role of government?
It depends on if you're Republican or Democrat, I suppose. I mean, there is a huge cost. I lived in Britain for some time, and I've lived in Finland, and I've lived in areas, these are countries, in Germany, where there is great social support, and there's some real benefits to that. But there's also some cost to that, too. Weighing those costs is not an easy thing. There's not an easy answer to that. Is it the role of the government? I tend to be more on the liberal side of things, but I also, when I lived in Britain, could see how people took advantage of it. And I don't know how you balance that. And of course, the issues of taxes and what the cost is another question. As a volunteer, I've been a volunteer since I was very young. And as a volunteer, I think that that's one of the great things about this country, even though, I pointed out some issues with it. I think that in most other countries, you don't see the kind of volunteerism that we see and in this country. And it's phenomenally different in this country. And I would hate to see us lose that, but I think there needs to be a balance. And it's certainly in terms of education and child support is where I think we really need to get a good balance of how much the government helps out instead of just mouthing that they care about children and no child left behind. I'd really like to see some differences occur. I'd like to see more money being invested in education and less in maybe some other things. But that's a very complex question. But what we need to, and this is my personal opinion, I'm not a politician. I would like to see these questions really being brought up in front of not just the state senates but in Congress, in front of the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Senate, as to how we help women and children in this country, and especially the children, because they're innocent. I mean, nobody can say that they did anything to deserve this, to deserve not having a home or not having money or not having somewhere to go and having to spend time at home by themselves while their mother tries to find a job. So I'm sure you'll find lots of people with differing opinions on that, which is why we fight in Congress, right? So.
You mentioned that women with children have shorter lives, and then you also said that women with male children have even shorter lives still, and I'm wondering what's the evolutionary,
well, there's no, okay, so this is a really, it's actually a very, very good question, and it's interesting on two levels. One of the things with evolutionary theory you have to be very cautious of is not to assume that anything you see confers a benefit. It can be a byproduct. Things like I'm an asthmatic, and one of the things among asthmatics is that, why would asthma evolve? I mean, it's a terrible thing and you can die from it. But one of the things that they've looked at is that people with asthma, and any of you have asthma out there, this is good news, we have lower rates of cancer. Now, asthma is an immune suppressancy, right? So what asthma does is, it's an immunoresponse disease. And what asthma does is it's hypervigilant. That's why we react to things that other people don't react to when it comes to breathing. Our body is being attacked by its own immunocompetence. But it also does very, very good about fighting cancer. Estrogen, on one hand, and I'm going to talk about both hormones, estrogen actually suppresses the immune system. And the reason it does that is because we have these little parasites that eventually become children. And sometimes they stay parasites for a really long time, but that's different. Women's bodies, women who with higher levels of estrogen are more fertile than women with lower levels of estrogen. And estrogen is basically a really good thing in women, except for one thing. It suppresses T cells. And what is T cell involved with? Cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer. So women with that's why women who have a history of cancer in their families should probably rethink doing any kind of hormones for birth control that involve estrogen. Now, testosterone, on the other hand, should be a banned substance. It's really bad. It's nasty. It smells really bad, too, by the way. I did a study on that. So if you've ever been into a into a hot day into a gym for like junior high age, you know, young adolescent boys, and you've gone into their locker room on a hot day, that's what testosterone smells like. It's nasty. Testosterone is very hard on the body. That's why men don't live as long as women. And, you know, there's a real easy way of if men want to prolong their life by another 10 years, there's a real easy way to do it. We do it with cattle. And, but so far, I've never seen any volunteers to get that extra 10 years. But, so what happens when women are pregnant with a male fetus is that male fetus is releasing testosterone. And that testosterone is then doing the same thing to the woman in much lower levels than testosterone does to males. So women with lots of male babies will tend to die younger. And the other thing that happens with lots of male babies, and I find this interesting with the fact that religious people have really, really large families, later born sons after having other male siblings ahead of them are more likely to be gay. And there's some interesting, I won't get into, if anybody wants to talk about the theory about that, I'll talk about it later, but it's kind of interesting that if you have lots of male offspring, the latter born or have a higher probability of being gay. Still means it's a small percent, it's just slightly higher. Does that kind of answer? Okay.
No, I can remember what I was going to ask now.
Oh, okay.
So when you said that women tend to, go more into religion, well, now that there's more younger people that are secular and, hanging around the Secular Student Alliance here on campus, and now do you think that those women, when they start out before they have children being secular, will be able to maintain that, and maybe the balance will eventually change?
That's a really interesting question. I love your shirt, by the way. It's the non-believers giving aid shirt. It's interesting. Now, probably the women that are involved in the secular movement who are young, I think they probably won't change. They'll remain secular. But what we do find are those women who would identify as non-religious or not affiliated with any religion. They don't really define themselves as an atheist or a free thinker, but they kind of are this nebulous, I don't think about it. They're the ones who are more likely, and the data show, are the ones who will become religious after they have a child. They won't become they'll do the religious ceremony when they get married because, as we know, weddings are not for the bride and groom, they're for the mother, right, of the bride. And so they'll do all that and then kind of go on with their non-religiousness. But then as soon as they have a child, something kicks in. And that's, it's very powerful, and it's really interesting that, again, the women are drawn then, well, I need to enlist my child in the synagogue or church or whatever because, that's how I was raised, and it's important, and how else are they going to learn? I love this one. How else are they going to learn their morals, without religion? So there's also, I think, this deeper need of that social support. So it's those women who are much more likely to be drawn back into religion rather than the ones who are already, radical secularists.
I look around here and I see a bunch of old people. I mean, there are hardly any younger people. Maybe he's the youngest here, I don't know. But we are all old people. So we don't come here for help in childbearing and childcaring and all this stuff.
Right.
What I do feel is that the secular movement is too preoccupied in the negative, in telling what the others are doing wrong, and we don't have any alternative for the positive.
Right.
We do need an alternative. Personally, I can tell you, I moved to Tucson about 18 years ago, and I hardly knew anybody here. I was all by myself, struggling with life and whatever was needed. I had a landscaper who just moved to Tucson in about the same time from Boston. And through our transactions, I found out, somebody gave him this advice, somebody lended him this. He was invited to dinner here. He just came the same time that I did, and he was already settled down. He went to his church, and he had an instant community.
Exactly.
And people all were welcoming, and they invited him. I still am all by myself. Here are all these people. We walk out of here, and I'm all alone in the world. And if we do not create a community, we don't have, I don't know the telephone number of anybody here.
Well, I think that needs to be corrected, don't you think? As a beginning. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I agree 100%.
Don't create what people need. Of course, this is, what I'm saying doesn't belong to older age necessarily. It belongs to any age.
Right.
We need a community. I'm a person who doesn't need a community that much, but sometimes I do a little bit. Most of the time I'd like to be left alone. Leave me to live my life. But sometimes you need it.
Yeah.
I need to find somebody who will supervise my trustee. Where can I find such a person? Well, I have a whole community. Any volunteers? I don't know whom to approach even.
No, I think she points out you point out a really interesting problem. And I mean, one of the things that I've observed coming into the Freethought community, and having come from a science background, and before that I worked in semiconductors, and so again, kind of sciencey stuff. I had my community, I had my work colleagues and things, which is what young people do too, right? They have their work colleagues, and they have their other ways of reaching out to the community. Whereas we grow older, if we reach higher, we lose that ability. We lose that kind of instantaneous. You're hanging around people, and young people make friends easier than I think those of us as we age. It's we're maybe a little bit more picky, and we've been bumped and bruised, and gone through the issues of life, and our friends are going away one by one, and we have these issues as we age. But that sense of community and the fact, I had the same problem when I moved to DC. It was very difficult for me to make friends and have that. Everybody had their little groups, and I didn't feel welcome in some of the organizations, the meetup groups. I walked into one meetup group, and no one even welcomed me or asked me my name. I just kind of sat down, and it was sort of odd. Whereas if you went into a church, synagogue, you would immediately be welcomed, and so glad, is this your first time at this church, and so on. So there is a lot to be said about that. Now, how much of it is our genetic makeup in terms of those of us who like to be, as you said, left alone a lot of the time, and atheists, I think, do sometimes go into that, herding cats kind of thing, where we do tend to be very independent thinkers and independent people, and we're happy reading books and, doing me and my cats and reading a book and surfing the web, and all those great things that we can do. And in a study I did of religious and non-religious people, I looked at people. I won't go into all the detail, but basically I came up with kind of two distinct groups of very religious people who knew they were right, and very non-religious people who knew they were right. And I didn't find a lot of differences between them in terms of happiness. They were both happy, satisfied with their lives, and lots of other things. But there were two very distinctive differences between the two groups. One was when it came to solving problems, as you might expect, the religious group said, well, I pray. And the non-religious group said, well, I drink or take drugs. I mean, at least they were honest, right? But the other difference was when it came to friends. Both were equally satisfied with the friends they had. Very happy with the friends and the number of friends they had. However, the religious group had more friends. They listed a much higher number of what they considered close friends, while the non-religious group listed far fewer close friends. Now that's very interesting in and of itself, that maybe we tend to have this, maybe there's some things about our genetic makeup that the thing that makes us, not accept religion right off the bat may be the same kind of thing that also affects the stuff that we don't need a lot of friends for us to be satisfied. That's a question that really could use some delving into as to what makes that happen. And the people who were very religious tended to need far more friends, yet both were equally satisfied. So all those kind of things fit into what you're saying, and I think it is interesting that, coming to this group, and I bet lots of people will come up and talk to you now, but I hope so anyway, that maybe, forming these social groups are important, and they don't have to be about atheism or even free thought. It can be a book club. It can be going out for hikes. I've often thought it'd be great to have a secular dog park. There's a great dog park by where I live, and I go there to get my dog fixed because I only have cats and I can't have a dog. And, people are so friendly and nice, and the dogs all get along. And it's kind of like having children, right? How many of you here made your adult friends through your children, through some sort of connection with kids? I mean, that's how my parents' adult friends were all through their connections through sports of my brother and other things. So it doesn't just because we're all atheists or humanists or free thinkers, that doesn't mean we always have everything in common. That's just one thing we have in common. Some of us like to go hiking, some of us like to read books, listen to music. I mean, developing these groups that kind of subgroups and forming smaller groups is a great idea. And we can't expect always to get along. I mean, I have lots of things in common with other people, and it doesn't mean I particularly like them. There's just something, right? We have personalities, and we like some people and don't like others. So it shouldn't be quite as forced, but at the same time, making it happen and making that extra effort to make somebody welcome in the community is really important.
Okay, I'm going to make just a short comment here in light of what Mika said. I'm going to pass the next question over. But I have to make a short comment here because this is a part of the free-thinking community of Tucson. This is just a part. In fact, it is a smaller part of the free-thinking community. We have 600 members in Tucson Atheists. We've got over 220 members in Skeptics of Tucson. We've got the Secular Student Alliance, which is all young people, and we've also got another group, Recovering from Religion. They're all part of the community, and they're all available to all of us. It's just that this group tends to be this group. And it's okay, because we all do things just a little different. Mm-hmm. And early on when we started, I'm a little bit of a leader in this community for that reason. But when we first started, it was like, well, why don't we all come together? And the point is, we all do things just a little different, and we appeal to a little different part. And if you want some of these smaller activities that Tucson Atheists, like a couple of days ago, a lot of us were meeting in a bar. Last night, they were singing at my house. There's different things that you can do. Hiking, we've got that too. And we've got Godless Benevolence, a whole secular group going out there just, doing things in the community. So I just wanted to cover that comment with saying, yeah, this isn't the entire community, and we are doing other things.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so you should talk and see what groups you might be interested in. So.
Hi, I very much enjoyed your talk this morning.
Thank you.
And, don't you think that women who are fully capable of the degree of critical thinking that men are still are suppressed in this regard? I know there's all this opportunity and everything, but still women are not encouraged to think critically. And I think that makes a difference. What is your view on that?
Yeah, I think there's probably some. I mean, I think it's changing a lot. When I think about, I mean, I'll be 57, and being raised by a very traditional father, not so much a religious household, but my father's pretty traditional, and women were not considered as smart as men, and my father's now changed his views, but thanks to his 2 daughters, but yeah, I think there is, probably some cultural things that influence this, that, young girls are supposed to be sort of helpless at times and a little goofy. Although I've always thought that, well, I remember when I was little, I always thought boys were really odd, but that was my personal opinion. So yeah, I mean, maybe girls, women, I'm going to say girls because it starts young, so I'm going to say girls, may not be encouraged as much to think critically. And we, as I mentioned, we do see in the self-help industry and in a lot of the woo stuff, it's mostly women. And one of the things that's interesting too, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, is one of the things that may draw men to religion is the fact, or woo, is the fact that there's lots of women involved in religion and woo. You got to go to where the grass grows, right? So, do we? Yeah, I think in general, if we were going to look at differences, we'd probably say that women are less encouraged to think critically, and there's also, this is an interesting thing. We've kind of, this will not be popular, by the way, and I'm going to the Women in Secularism conference next week, and I'm going to be talking about what I'm about to say. So hopefully I'll survive, because I don't think it'll go over really well. But our modern society, Western society, has been sort of feminized, and we don't appreciate things like critical thinking. We hear lots of people, if I'd had my slides up, one of the self-help books said unthink. We encourage people not to think. I mean, I like yoga. I do a little bit of yoga, but I don't like doing it with yoga classes because I can't tolerate the woo in the background, and I find it really annoying. And then I can't relax because it's let go of all your thoughts, listen to your heart. It's like my heart is beating. That's what my heart's doing. That's a boom, 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 boom. It's my brain that's thinking, and so we were encouraged to not think. And a lot of the feminist theory, a lot of the feminist writing has been about saying how things like rational thought are male things, and thinking and caring and emotions are female things. And that's just, I'm sorry, that's just bull. And so I think as a culture we've been encouraged to stop thinking. And we have made this, kind of given a black name to the fact that critical thinking is important, and that rationalism is important, and that we need to consider data and facts instead of just feeling things, and that's a feminine thing that we need to be doing, that we need to get in touch with our feminine side. And when I want to get in touch with my feminine side, I buy shoes. That's how I do it. So I think it's fair to say that there's certainly a bias, and it is also promoted by the feminist movement. I mean, a part of the feminist movement. I'm not going to say the whole thing. But a part of the feminist movement is to suggest that male type behavior is inappropriate and bad, and female type behavior is good. And I actually find this very demeaning to women. It's one of the things I have some real issues with when women are told to become victims and to embrace victimhood. And that's another thing we're seeing a lot of, and I find it really annoying. And this whole thing about privileging, and men are more privileged, and white males are privileged. And I mean, everyone's privileged in some way. We live in a country where we're all privileged. When we look at how the rest of the world has lived, we're more privileged than Henry VIII in terms of the things we have in medicine and clean water and taking a bath and all those great things, having a hot shower. So, yeah, we've lately embraced this sense of victimization, and we've told women that it's okay to be victims and to be proud of the fact of being victims. And I think that's part of it too, and it needs to be explored more. And I don't want to be a victim. I mean, it's easy for any of us to be a victim. We can talk about, that's why I always tell people I'm not the kind of psychologist to tell me about your mother. We all blame our mothers for, sorry moms out there, so I'm talking about Mother's Day, right? As soon as my sister had my niece, it's my niece, it's not her child, it's my niece. I said, well, you're now going to be blamed for everything that goes wrong in her life. You might as well start feeling guilty now. But it's true, we blame our parents, we blame our moms for not raising us correctly. And our society teaches us to do that. They equate child abuse in terms of, sexual abuse or being beaten with being neglected because your parents didn't go to the ballet with you that day when you had your recital. And we've confused what victimhood is and what it means to try to be more rational and to look at our past and say, yeah, I had a few bumps in the road. There were some things that, could have been done differently, but hey, I am who I am, and probably in part because of those bumps I hit in the road. Life is not perfect, and embrace it and get over it. Pull your pants on and get going with the program. But yeah, I think there is something to be said about girls being taught to think differently.
I can dovetail some of my remarks to your last remarks because I work in my day job as a victim advocate, and I was going to ask you about the evolutionary role of male power and control, since, as you point out, men generally are bigger, although not always. As a guy who was shorter and skinnier growing up, it seems like it's okay for women to kind of be very, you could say, superficial in their preference for tall men over short men and muscular men over skinny men. A lot of us who grew up as thin men, I think, have that experience. At the other end of the spectrum, working in my current life with victims of domestic violence and some of sexual assault, it's just interesting to me that there are some women who break away once they've had that abuse. Other women, and I don't think it's necessarily women with children, although it sometimes is, they want to hold on to that relationship. That proportion of women who do, well, and men too, and that smaller proportion of men who are abused by women. Mm-hmm. But what are you, do you have research that goes into that? Because we all know, I mean, there's reasons why women stay. We're not unsympathetic to that. There's strong emotional, financial ties in a lot of those cases. But it's interesting that those women who remain attached, it's beyond the realm of rational thought.
Right.
That's what's so striking in a lot of those cases.
Yeah, I mean, I probably don't. You probably know much more about it than I do and have probably better answers than I do, because it's not an area that I researched. I mean, you can talk about things like codependency and all the other psychological issues of, being abandoned by fathers and so on. and why women are more likely to tolerate abuse, physical abuse, and still think that their partner loves them, and so on. And actually, it's interesting. Andy Thompson. Have you ever had Andy come and speak here? If you haven't, you should. He wrote the book Why We Believe in Gods, and I know you've met Andy, and he's great. He's one of our trustees, and he's a great guy. And he's a psychiatrist, a forensic psychiatrist, and so he does a lot of analyses on violence on women and murders. I mean, he gets all the good stuff. And one of the things that he pointed out when he's interviewed men who have have been beating their wives and end up killing them, and then he goes in and interviews them. I don't envy Andy's job. One of the things that he says is very, very common almost always is the man is grieving over the loss of his partner, and that's the one person he wants to talk to and talk with about what he's going through. So there's all kinds of dynamics that are going on that is very difficult for us to comprehend. And I'm not going to say any more about it because it really isn't my area of expertise. And it's something that I think needs to be looked at, carefully and try to understand it. And maybe some of that, looking at some of the stuff with evolutionary psychology and women's role in the nurturing stuff and things like that might help. But I think there's a lot more going on environmentally and as well as probably some genetic influences. So and that's all I'll comment on. Sorry. I know.
Hi. I wanted to go back to your discussion about why fewer women are in this movement. And women go to church. We were talking about what I think is a true reason, the powerlessness that women feel when they're alone. They have no financial supports or very little. And the church does provide social support. We all need social support, as we've heard already. But the church also provides meetings, cooking, all kinds of food operations. And I've often thought with our organization, we need a building where we can have our meetings, we can have our potlucks, we can have these talks. You have a place where people can go. I think that is critical if you want to get people together to support a movement. And I'll go one step further. I've traveled a lot, and usually you go to cathedrals, churches, Buddhist temples. And so Angkor Wat in Cambodia, all these things were built by religious beliefs. And they bring people. And I said, what can atheists do? What can we build? What can we have? What kind of monument can we have that would bring people to us?
Universities?
What's that?
Universities?
Universities, yeah, but it's not identified.
No, I know.
It's
I'm just
true.
kind of.
But that's what people like to see and go
Yeah.
to. I mean,
No,
it's a far-fetched idea, but I don't think so. Look at people who go to the Mormon church up in Salt Lake City, and they get this garbage, the movie and all that stuff. But they go, and it attracts people.
Yeah, it does.
We
And
need something that will bring people together into one place. And also, I wanted to ask you if you know of anybody that has done that. Do atheists have a building?
There is some stuff going on in Britain and in the U.S. I think there is an undercurrent of doing something like this. Now, I think some people have been talking about, the UUs, the Unitarians, maybe using their facilities on a different day, since we don't have to meet on Sundays, right? And some are talking about, creating a building. Of course, again, it costs a lot of money, and that's not something our movement has. When you look at the amount of money we have compared to religion, it's microscopic. But yeah, I agree, and I think for a lot of people it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary for a number of people. And I think that's been one of the things that I've seen in this movement when I first came in, was the idea, the herding of the cats and everybody being independent. And no, we don't need to have those kind of social things, and we don't need to have celebrations, and we don't need, well, we're social animals, and we need that. I mean, evolutionarily, we are social animals, and we need those festivals. That's why festivals came about in the first place. Not because God sent it down, right? That makes no sense. It's because we needed them. All societies have festivals of some kind, usually based around the solar year. And it makes sense. You break bread together, you share stories, you share history, you tell stories that your grandparents told you. That's what we do, during holiday times. I love the holidays. I like getting together with my family and hearing the same story, for the 100th time. It's great, right? And it is. Families put the fun in dysfunctional, but there are a lot of good things with families, that we share these traditions and we see people we haven't seen for a while. So yeah, it's very important. And I think there is a growing movement. And if you give me your email later, I'll send you some of the articles that are going on, but I think that need is being slowly addressed. I think the humanists have been trying to do that for a while, but I think now we're seeing, there was an article recently, maybe 3 months ago, about they called it an atheist church. And it's, basically, UUs are dysfunctional atheists, right? And is it? So anyway, but yeah, I agree. Yes?
I want to go back to your comment about the feminization of, if not Western society, U.S. society.
Mm-hmm.
And I obviously haven't thought this through like you have, but I want to offer at least 4 counterexamples.
Okay.
Increasing militarization, not feminist. Increasing violence, not feminist. Increasing coarsening of culture, not feminine. I wrote another one down too. Increasing loss of commitment, people talking about others not being willing to commit, not particularly associated with the female. So there are certainly I wouldn't agree with your feminized culture. I don't think it's a masculinized culture either. I just think there are these counter directions that are operating at the same time.
There's a really great book by Steve Pinker, his latest book about have you read it? We actually are far less violent than we ever have been before. Violence drops. The difference is that violence is on television 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. How many of you were by the 24 hours? It was a terrible tragedy in Boston, right? But after 24 hours of only seeing what was going on in Boston, weren't we a little tired of it? Didn't you want to know what was going on in North Korea or maybe other parts of the world? We had this tendency there's a colleague of mine wrote an article called Bowling with Imaginary Friends. And he talks about how, in the paper, he talked about how our mind can be easily deceived into thinking that the people we see on television and the things going on television are actually real. We may cognitively be able to say, that's television and this is, my real life. But deeper, we don't. And so watching television, we find this with older people versus younger people. Older people tend to watch a lot more television, and we find a difference with people who watch Fox News versus people who watch MSNBC, are much more frightened in terms of violence, and yet the elderly are the least likely to see violence, but they will rate themselves as being much more highly much more likely to have violence go against them. And the people who are most likely to die or be hurt in violence are young men, in their sexual prime. But that's going down as well. And warfare is going down. We talk now, the type of warfare we do is much gentler. I know that's kind of a hard term, but when you think about Genghis Khan and World War I and wars where, I mean, the Civil War, the bloodiest war ever, really, we have much more gentle wars in terms of the number of dead, and it's far less violent. We don't talk about, we are very careful when the military apologizes when there's collateral damage. So I'm not saying that's a feminization, but I think the idea that there's more violence is a false perception. I'm sorry?
Can I give 2 examples of what I'm talking about?
Okay.
I'm talking about things like an increasingly militarized police force, an increasingly militarized border, and the increasing violence of gratuitous violence like this. I have to put this down to show you. Where it's a high five and babies are taught not to wave, but to give me 5. And the 5 is a smack. That's the kind of thing I'm talking
Okay.
about. Not Steve Pinker's examples and not these examples that you're talking about war.
Well, yeah.
Certain things that have already existed, it is being noted by lots of cultural critics and lots of us just, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the reaction to 9/11 is obviously the root cause for the increase in the border and giving, you know, police state, although if you've ever lived in a police state, we're not even close. It feels like it sometimes. I go through security. But I still think that it is, we're seeing, on the other side of things, a more feminized ideology, even though there's these eruptions of what, you know, we see as being predominantly male. And the idea of, you know, we're much less likely to spank our children than we were before. We're far more likely we do a lot more hugging than we did before. So there are all these other examples that we can go through. You're always going to find, you know, some examples that counter, but when we look at the overall map of things, then we will see a higher rate of this feminization occurring. And yeah, I mean, so we're going to have to agree to disagree on that for right now.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Kim, and I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you for your thoughts. I'm a social worker. I have been for about 12 years, and I also teach future social workers for ASU, and so this has brought some interesting thoughts for me. I help many different clients, but women particularly in macro scale as well as micro one-on-one. And I'm wondering if you have suggestions for social workers who work with female clients that come in, let's say, under the oppression of faith-based beliefs. Often what we talk about in the helping profession is to meet people where they are and to move from that foundation. And I'm just wondering if you have some suggestions and practicality for maybe vision of best practice in that.
Oh gosh, again, it's a very good question. I think a couple things, and just and thank you for being in. I mean, social work is incredibly important. I know how hard it is. I used to volunteer for CASA, and it can be very, very difficult and emotionally very strenuous. There does tend to be a push within the social support groups that religion can be the answer. And we do see, one of the things when I worked in CASA is court-appointed special advocates for children. And I did a lot of the computer entry stuff as a volunteer. And often, if in placing the child in care outside of their parents, one of the things they looked at is this grandparent attends church, which somehow meant that that was a safe place to be. And so there's that attitude, right, of if you're religious, you're going to be a kinder, gentler person than somebody who's non-religious. So I think in talking to, since you have the opportunity to train social workers, is talking about the fact that that's not always the case, that abuse happens, across all spectrums. But if you actually want to look at, one of the things is in prison, you see a much higher rate of religious people than non-religious people. Now, how many of them convert during their time in prison, which is also interesting as well, thinking it will help them get out early. So there is this attitude of religion being a panacea to help people, and that if again, giving up our problems to a higher power is often what's enforced. And women, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of these women probably have some other issues too, right? They maybe have drug issues, alcohol abuse issues, and where are they sent to resolve these problems but AA and other organizations that again emphasize this higher power. And we need to start educating people, social workers and therapists. Not all therapists are psychologists, and many. It's interesting. Among psychologists, those in research are far less likely to believe in any kind of God. Most of us are atheists. In the clinical aspect of psychology, which is what most people are familiar with, because that's what they hear about and what they see, far more of them are religious than those of us who do research. So again, the community as a whole will tend to use the religious model to say that that's how people need to get better and need to move on with their life. And most of the alcohol treatment centers all use religion and higher power, and it doesn't work with people who are non-religious. And as many times as we talk about, if people have tried to approach them on that, we just can't get through to them that you need to take into consideration, but a lot of people don't fall for this. And that, and the data do show that about a third of the people are helped, a third, kind of think they got worse, and a third just pretty much stay the same. And so I think we need to change the dynamics of how we teach people to do social work and support and bring a secular perspective to that. Does that answer kind of your question?
I have a question which is really a follow-up on a response that you gave to a question about an hour ago. The question was about the role of government in being a social support system that in some sense replaces the social support system provided by religion. And you said that you had experience in England, and I think in maybe was it Finland, and that there were some negatives you saw to too high reliance on using government as the primary support system for things like childcare. And so I wondered if you could amplify a bit on how that worked in England, or how it did not work in England, and also about whether the same issues came up in Finland.
Yeah, it wasn't so much on childcare because I wasn't around people who had kids. What I did see was let me start with Finland. In Finland, and this is a really long time ago because I was 20. So when a woman had a baby, she was given a year off and full pay and guaranteed to go back to get her job back. And if she got pregnant again, she could, again, stay home for yet another year, so on, and guaranteed to have her job back. Now imagine that from a company perspective. of the cost of that to a company. They can't hire, they're already paying one person's salary, they have to now pay a second person's salary to actually do that job. And while it's great for the woman, raising the baby to have that whole year off, but at the same time, it's costing the the private industry or the government, because she could be working for the government, an awful lot of money. So there's that issue of it, of how much are we willing as a society to pay. Now, in some societies, that's fine. And that's a decision that the society needs to make. But that's an issue. In Britain, what I saw was more on the medical side of things. People used, because you didn't have to pay to go to the doctor, right? People used their doctor as kind of a fictive uncle or aunt to go and talk to. And this was mainly true among the elderly. And I talked to a lot of physicians about it, and they said that, certainly that is one of the things that they have found, is that people will go in, more to talk. They'd have some kind of ailment, but it wasn't serious enough to go to a doctor. And so it's interesting, how do you balance that? Not letting, and it wasn't that they were purposely trying to abuse the system, it was just convenient, right? They're lonely, they want to talk to somebody, so they go to their doctor. Well, that, of course, has a cost as well. Patients who are ill don't always get seen right away, and plus there's simply an actual cost in pounds to do that. And the other thing I saw in Britain, it's really difficult to fire anyone, and it's because of social laws and things that, and there was sort of an attitude of, I don't have to try really hard, I'll be taken care of. And the American work ethic is pretty strong, and I think most of us would probably agree with that. And there were people I saw with that work ethic in Britain, but I didn't see it as much. Now, I would have to say that what I have found when I was teaching at university level was I did see the work ethic among students be pretty lax. And do you guys know the term helicopter parents, right? And parents always coming into the rescue, which is in a way kind of the same concept of this, social support. So there are consequences for offering lots of social support. Besides the taxes, there is the weight of how do you get people to want to really work. And I'm probably not saying this quite the right way. I think most people, I think the majority of people who end up looking for social benefits in this country tend to not stay on them. There's a small portion that do, but most people try to get off as soon as possible. So it's weighing that plus and minus that I'm talking about, that you can't, you got to go in with your eyes open. And if as a society, we decide that paying taxes, higher taxes in order to supplement people, that decision can be made by the population. And I'm not going to necessarily disagree with it, but just realize that there are these other consequences. And then there's the other side of the coin. There are people who definitely need to have care, and only the government can really do that. And that's people who are or suffer from mental disorders like schizophrenia, who don't have anyone to be able to help them and are living. Most of the people on the street, most homeless people, have some type of mental issue, and so I think that personally, I think that the government is the only organization that has the power to maybe really, really do something to try to help these people, and medical care. I'm a strong one for support from the government for medical care, for research, and for helping those people who don't have insurance and don't have the money to pay for something terrible that happens to them. So, I mean, I definitely lean in that direction, but that doesn't mean I'm right. It just means that happens to be my leanings, and I think there's lots of room for discussion on this. And yeah, so I don't know if I answered your question any more than that, but it's I'm not a politician, so I'll say that, or an economist.
Okay, I would like to wonder if you would comment on the interview that was on PBS NewsHour last week. A therapist was being interviewed about how to perform trauma therapy for the victims of the Boston tragedy, and he was saying, he was thanking science for giving him the tools, the therapy tools for treating these trauma victims in a way that the therapist could restore their faith in God.
Oh, that's great. I didn't see the interview. Now I'm going to have to go see it.
The transcript is on the PBS.
Oh, I'll have to read that. That sounds like. Yeah. So there was an interview last week on PBS where a therapist was talking about how he was grateful to science for giving him the tools of how to help people, the victims of the Boston tragedy, to find a way to believe in God. That science offered him up this, right?
As the trauma would cause people to lose their faith in God. The tools of scientific therapy would help the therapist restore their faith.
Restore their faith, yeah. Well, I mean, bollocks is the first word that comes to mind for me, but yeah, there's a lot I could say about that, and I'm probably, oh dear, that's scary. Yeah, I have to say that I don't always have a huge respect for therapy, and I've known some really good therapists, and I know some really good people who really care, but there's a lot of wackos out there with PhD behind their name or masters, and there's not, I mean, all I have to do is turn on the TV and see Dr. Phil's face, and I realize that, you don't have to be really bright to get your PhD. So, yeah, boy, what can I say? I don't think I can say anything about it. I'm just stunned, actually. I'm stunned that PBS would have. I mean, there's also that whole thing about there were people that were very badly hurt, probably, about 100 people that were badly hurt. But I remember on the news, people were talking I was listening to PBS and on the radio, and they were talking about the post-traumatic stress of people seeing SWAT teams in their backyard. I'm going, what? Post-traumatic stress syndrome for people for seeing a SWAT team in their backyard? I grew up in LA. That was common. I don't have post-traumatic stress. I mean, I'd be going, wow, cool, there's a SWAT team, in the backyard. And of course, in Washington, D.C., we see them all the time. They people with big guns walking around in black outfits, and it goes to your militarization thing and the state police. But yeah, but it also goes back to that victimhood thing, that everyone needs to be a victim. And, are you a victim if you see a SWAT team in your backyard? Well, if they're not pointing the gun at you, and they haven't, killed the family dog, and they haven't shot up your house, I would say it really does harm to those people who really do suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome. It lessens. I mean, think about the young men and women coming back from the Middle East who have gone through these things of, seeing war firsthand, seeing friends blown apart. That should not be compared to seeing a SWAT team in your backyard. I find it, as a psychologist, I find it really demeaning, just as I do find demeaning that thinking that, you know, that sexual child abuse or violence against children is the same kind of trauma of someone who doesn't have the perfect mother. It devalues us. So I think that's all I'm going to say about that. Is I'm going to have to read the transcripts and then I can, you know, get as angry about it as you probably were when you were watching.
Well, let's give a big round of applause to Elisabeth. Great job.
Thank you.
Great job. I have two announcements. We have a special room in the cafeteria, 2500.